Welcome back to another episode of EV Charging Minute. I'm Tony Booth, your host and the founder of Stay in Charge, bringing you this podcast every week to help you just get some additional knowledge, learn a little bit about EV charging solutions as it pertains to commercial real estate properties. And this can be anything from apartment complex to hotels to workplaces, hospitals, anywhere you know that you have a commercial property where you might put an EV charging in. That's what we're here to help you learn different things. And as if you listened to last week, you know, this week we're doing a little mini series right now. And this is the second part of that mini series where we are talking about the six aspects that we look at when designing the right system for a location. Today we're in number 2. And that's the second step that we will take with everybody, where we ask them who is going to be using these stations, right? This is a very important thing to understand because this leads us into being able to ask or answer questions related to a whole lot more of the things coming down the pike, right? Like in the next remaining 4 aspects as we look at whether we're going to charge for it, you know, how we're controlling access, things like that all play into who is going to use them. Because if you think about the simplest side of this, if I have a commercial location and I'm putting them in for my employees, right? And I'm not going to charge them and all this stuff, right? It could be a very, very simple solution. If I'm putting them in for the public, it's a whole lot different story, right? So that's why we have to first understand who is going to be using these chargers. So we kind of typically classify them as follows. The kind of top of the chart is what we call public charging, semi-private charging, private charging, and fleet charging. So those are kind of 4 big buckets, and everything else can kind of downstream can fit into those buckets in one way, shape, or the other. But it's easy to kind of start with that top level, which is public, semi-private, private, and fleet. The difference between now let's just talk a little bit about the difference there. The difference between each of those. Okay, public. If you think about public, that's just general person off the street can drive up and use the charger, right? That could be somebody that's in your neighborhood, in the area, one time and one time only, or it could be people that are coming there all the time. It could be public people that are registered, like they may have to register to use the system somehow in some way, or they may just drive up and plug in, or they may be downloading an app, or they might be just swiping a credit card. So that's your public side of it. And that really just falls down to anybody. You have no restrictions over who can use them. So as long as they meet the minimum requirements that is set for, they can do that. And we kind of call that as an ad hoc user. You can also have like public registered users, which is slightly different in that maybe there's a way that we've registered them ahead of time, thinking of someone like maybe that's at a gym membership or something like that, which when it's public registered, it really starts to move into that, what we call our semi-private. Sometimes there's a little bit of mix between that public and semi-private, where you have a semi-private kind of scenario and maybe you want to open it up to a little bit of public. But typically, once you get into this kind of out of that just general public, you're going to get into what we call semi-private. So the semi-private market that we look at, that's a market where we know the people, all right? We know who they are. We may not know them before they get there, but we know who they are. So this would be a place, this could be a hotel, right? And if you're only allowing guests to use it, that is a semi-private scenario. Only your guests, you know who they are, they're registered with you. Could be a customer. If you're a retail shop, maybe that the people have to register for your loyalty program to get access to those chargers. So that becomes that semi-private. Semi-private continues on as well. It will include things like tenants, employees, can include a lot of things like that, because that's still in the semi-private, in that we have a charger in a lot, in a location that multiple people will use it, but it's people we know who they are. And so we know that if we have a charger at an apartment complex that's available for our tenants, then we know who those people are. Whether we have 100 tenants or 1,000 tenants, we still know who they are. So we can easily set up a system and how to, we can define who those users are. You can get into semi-private where it's an owner, right? In a condo complex where maybe you have some shared charging, you'll run into owners, employees. And then on the last part of the private side, so then you get into you move closer to a private. Now, private, you're going to run into this some at commercial real estate, but not quite as much. Private is where you really have only one person using that charger. Like, I wouldn't consider a charger to be private unless it's really dedicated to an individual user. So we do run into this when we get involved with condominium, so places where the HOA, where the parking's deeded. So there's only so many parking spots and they're deeded to the owner. In that scenario, you are now in a private kind of installation because only that owner of that parking spot can use that. But it still can fall into what we would consider commercial EV charging, because if this is a condo with a parking garage, there's no way for that individual owner of that parking space to feed the power to their charging system through their own private meter, right? So they have to rely on some level of commercial charging, and those HOAs and those condos will have to do some type of commercial charging. But that's in a private level. So once it's in a private level, it changes a little bit of things we need to do or worry about. So that's why I want to define what that is. And fleet moves into a whole nother kind of thing to look at and things to understand. Fleet can be controlled, using, is it just certain vehicles that are allowed? And do we connect using the vehicle? Do we, assign the vehicle to the access, or do we assign individual employees, drivers, things like that? So those are really the four core areas: is public, semi-private, private, and fleet. The bulk of commercial locations, okay, the bulk of what we deal with is going to be in that semi-private market. That is really where, when you look at the numbers that are out there and the things that talk about the growth in EV charging, that real growth is going to occur in that, for commercial, is going to grow in that semi-private. If you look at the predictions on the number of chargers to be installed between now and 2035, it's just, globally, it's an incredible amount of numbers, incredible amount of chargers. The bulk will be private, in individual homes, like in your garage and things like that. But the next largest group is that semi-private group. So that really runs into a lot of them. So what we want to do is make sure, as we're defining, the parameters of how we're going to develop this system, is we want to now decide who is going to use them. And much like on the other stuff that we've talked about, in the beginning with the goals, the same is going to happen here, because we want to look at each of these potential users and we want to rank them and determine what the importance is and whether they actually fit for us or not. Because we might decide that, we want to, the first thought could be, and we get this a lot, I want anybody to be able to use them. I'll let the public use them, let them come in and use them. And then once they realize that, well, wait a minute, in order to allow the public, I'm going to have to do this, this, and this. So I've got 3 or 4 steps, added things to put on there, added cost, added whatever. And I'm only going to collect this, right? Is it really worth the effort? Is it really worth opening up a charger to the public if you already have an overloaded charger? Like if you put chargers in and realize, like if you're putting them in at a hospital or something like that, and you realize that they're being used all the time, already once you get them in and you've opened them up to the public, and now you're blocking off the people that you really put them there for. So what we typically will do is do the same thing and kind of rank these in order, uh, just like we did our goals. If we want a public access, is that the most important thing, or is that somewhat important? You know, again, if you have a convenience store, you get it into the selling of electron business, you know darn right well you're public ad hoc. But if you have an apartment complex behind a gated community, you don't want to be like, even if you thought you could make a couple extra bucks, do you really want to be dealing with somebody coming through the gates and that kind of stuff? So that's why all this matters in figuring this out. What I want to do is jump a little bit into details of each one so that you can better understand and how we kind of separate all that, right? So again, public ad hoc, that's your random users that are going to show up out of nowhere, driving by. They're going to find you on a map. They're going to pull up and they're going to want to charge. This section is typically going to be for the DC fast chargers as well. We have a lot of hotels that leave their chargers open during the day, but they don't draw that much business because they're level twos, and not many people are coming in and wanting to get, sit for 2 hours to charge their car. However, I mean, I say that, but I will say that we do have hotels and we do have locations outside of hotels that do make a little bit of money by having that ad hoc availability there. They get some people that will pull in, maybe they're jumping on their Wi-Fi and they're sitting in their car charging a little bit while they're doing that, sending out some emails or something and just grabbing a small charge. So you don't want to disregard it completely, but there are hotels that I know that, they have the network because it simplified their operations. But if they didn't want to simplify their operations, that ad hoc need would not provide enough revenue to make the network worthwhile. Okay. So the next group, so your public ad hoc, when you look at that, you're really looking at what I would say there is you're going to want a POS system. You're going to want to be able to swipe a credit card. If that is your primary user, if public ad hoc is your primary user, you want to make it as simple and easy as possible for them to use that. So you want software that will enable plug to charge, and you want a POS system so they can just tap their card and start charging. The next side on the public, when you get more detailed into the public registered, and this is really where my hotels fall in and stuff like that. In the public registered side, you're looking at scenarios where we kind of know who the people are. We know maybe they're a guest, maybe they're not, maybe we don't know exactly who they are, but one way we get to know who they are is we make them register. So our stations that are out in the public, outside of our DC fast chargers with POS systems, the bulk of those are going to require that you download a mobile app. So once somebody downloads the mobile app and fills out their account, now they're what we would consider a public registered user. And that could be registered on my network, that could be registered on other people's networks. But the bottom line is they've done the process of registering. We know they have money, we know they have a credit card assigned somewhere, and they're coming in and using that. This is that line between semi-private and public, because we kind of know who they are, but we're letting almost, kind of maybe letting anybody that takes the time to register. And then you get into the next step below that, which is where we start getting into a more of a semi-private registered. And this is an area where you are going to restrict access. Okay. So in that scenario, it could be a guest or a customer. Like you could have a hotel. You might say, I only want guests that are staying here that have a reservation in my hotel using my chargers. So that's a good way to define who can use it. If you have tenants or residents and they're using, they're sharing charging, they're going to fall into this kind of semi-private area again. So in that scenario, we know who they are. We know how to engage with them and provide them credentials or provide them their access. And we want to know who's using them and when they use them. But that's a shared scenario where you may have 5 different guests that are using your chargers that are staying tonight. You might have 5 different tenants in your apartment complex that use the EV charging, or you have, a condominium complex with owners, and you have 4 stations available for them, in the general area where they can share those charging. Again, semi-private. All of this matters, again, so that we know how we're going to be able to identify who's using them, how we're going to make sure that only the authorized users are using them, and how we might be collecting fees from them. So moving on down into the more closed systems, you get into what we could consider like an employee workplace charging, where you have employees coming in and you're going to put some chargers in your parking lot, your office parking lot, and you don't want employees from the neighbors coming over. You don't want people coming off the street using your chargers. You only want your employees. So in that case, you might put in a couple of chargers, might have a half a dozen employees that drive EVs, and they take turns, swapping back and forth. So this can be a semi-private or a private scenario. Again, this gets closer to the private because this could be as simple as control and access with an RFID card, right? Or a switch inside the building, depending on your location. I know, years ago where I worked, we could have done this, very simply, and had the chargers out front of the office, and you could walk into the office and flip a switch to turn your charger on, and when we left, turn them off. So there's a lot of ways when you get into that. Next piece, moving on to who might be using them after employees, as we roll into the fleet side. So when you get into the fleet, now we got to think about, we know the vehicles that are going to be allowed to charge, but do we know who might be driving each vehicle? And does it matter? Because it may only matter that we know the vehicle that gets charged. So that's why we want to know if we're going to put some chargers in and they are going to be fleet charging. We might say, hey, we can get an RFID card or key fob. We can put it on the keychain of the vehicle. So whenever somebody needs to charge that vehicle, they just swipe the card in front of the charger, plug the car up, and it charges away. And it's simple as that. Or we could get more in depth if we need more information or want to control more, and maybe it's something where there's a mobile app or there's dedicated scenarios or things like that. So again, this is why it's important to start to understand who's using them, and then also decide if any of the others fit. Okay, because really you want to put this in a table as well, where you're going to have your public ad hoc, right? On your left side, you're going to have public ad hoc. Then you're going to have semi-private users, and define what they are, what those people could be. And then you got your private, and then your fleet. So I'll give you another example we were working on recently. We were looking at a college campus. And so going through who's using them on a college campus, you've got a wide array there, right? If you go campus wide, we've got students, obviously, you got students. Underneath the student side, you may have some commuting students, and then you have students that may live on campus and students who live off campus. So you have, kind of a group there. Pretty simple, but we kind of, again, this is a semi-private group, right? We know who students are. They have to be registered in the school. So we can create a system that allows only our registered students to use our chargers. But that's not the only people that might visit the campus. We have now faculty and staff. So if you want to get your faculty and staff all covered, that's another group. But again, that's a semi-private group, right? We know who those people are. We know who our staff is. We know who our faculty are. So we can assign them access to our charging solution. This particular campus is looking at fleets as well. They're going to electrify some buses. They're going to, some of their their systems around security cars and things like that. They want to electrify everything. So now they've got fleet charging they need. So they're going to have some fleet charging. And when you look at fleet charging, we had to look at, how are we going to do that? And then the fourth user that we kind of identified going through their process was public. And then what we ultimately decided on was we kind of wanted a public registered type scenario, not an ad hoc, because we didn't want to have general public realizing that they have chargers on campus and just attracting more attention to the campus, right? You've got students walking around, you've got all this stuff. Do we really need a bunch of people coming to the campus? We almost eliminated public altogether, but they realized that you have visitors and you had game days and things like that people were coming. So we did a quasi public registered scenario with them, and we didn't promote those chargers. So now when we looked at all that thing, right, we had now students, faculty and staff, fleet charging, and public access charging. So we had 4 different kind of bulk user groups. Now, when we started looking at, do we combine them all? Like, do we just build a system so anybody can go anywhere? What we realized was that is a possible solution, right? We could create every charger on campus could be networked, connected into everything. And, because a networked solution could cover all that. And we could issue cards, we could do all kinds of different things. But in building out the systems and figuring out how to build everything, how to put everything, how to share power, how to locate them so that they're convenient and safe, we recognized that the best solution for this particular location was to split it up into 4 completely separate networks. So they have some chargers that are designated for faculty and staff, some that are designated for students. Some on campus in certain unique locations are available to the public. Again, not promoted, but available. And then we had dedicated fleet. Now the fleet vehicles can cross over into some of the others. They can all cross over and use public. Okay. So when we took this whole network and laid it out, anybody could go use the public ones as long as they had registered inside that campus network. They had to register, get approved inside the campus network, then they could use the public. If they were in a fleet vehicle, they could use the public. So this is why this is so important, and make sure that you run through that matrix for your own charging solution as well. All right. That's all for today. I know this is a lot, but listen, if you ever got questions, comments, problems, reach out to us. We walk through people with this basically for free. This is what we do when we're setting up anything for anybody, is we'll help you understand all this. So reach out anytime, sales@stayincharge.com. We're here to help. I hope you learned something new today, and we'll see you next week on EV Charging Minute.